background actually looks very nice.
Perfect.
Colleagues, it's 11 o'clock. Should I open up the room?
Yes, I think we are ready.
Okay, I'm going to put up a screen now, and then the moment I take off the screen, it's your cue to start.
Give a minute for everyone to join, as I see so many people are joining.
It's so hard.
No, let me mute myself. Oh, listen to my story.
How it's good for you, how it's bad for you to eat too much, where is it found, what foods should you eat, that kind of thing. And then in the last paragraph, you have to end your letter in some way. So you're going to say, I hope that you take all this information and make use of it and change your diet and maybe come back to me for a checkup.
I think we'll get going. I'm aware that there are many other people that are going to be joining us today, but a welcome to all who've joined. Today, this is hosted by IMBOKODO, which is the UKZN Women in Leadership Program. And it's almost a year ago since we had the first of these workshops where we shared experiences, first COVID-19, and many people under all sorts of things. And I'm sure most of you will learn a lot, but also take away from today's workshop. So thanks to all of those who've been involved in getting it together, and I hope you all enjoy it. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Professor Mariam Sidat from the School of Social Science and the College of Humanities at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. I have the singular privilege of introducing Dr. Shen Govender. Dr. Govender has kindly agreed to spend some time with us this morning. She's a specialist psychiatrist, and her area of focus is on diagnosing, treatment, and management of a range of psychiatric illnesses. She has a holistic approach. She's collaborative. She works together with families and individuals. And to manage psychiatric disorders. Healing and mental wellness is a journey, according to Dr. Govender, and she strives for working with her patients and finding solutions. She takes a very personalized approach to patient care, and her level of empathy is absolutely phenomenal. She is inclusive of family in the treatment process and encourages mental wellness through the use of both pharmaceuticals, psychotherapy, and lifestyle changes. I'd like to mention that frontline workers have faced occupational trauma associated with fatalities of patients, colleagues, family, friends during COVID-19. And Dr. Govender has been at the forefront of efforts to humanize significant loss among medics, which required innovation at the outset in an effort to preserve mental well-being. So as a psychiatrist, she responded to the call and operationalized what we saw as the first warning guard of honor for frontline workers at eThekwini Heart Hospital. This innovative and effective practice has become increasingly popular in hospitals across the globe, offering warning alternatives and displays of respect and deceased. And we are very proud and privileged that one of our very own was at the forefront of such an initiative. Welcome, Dr. Govender. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Professor Sirat and the panelists and UKZN for the opportunity to create awareness about being mindful. You know, the WHO on the 11th of March 2020 declared COVID-19 outbreak a global pandemic. Our president announced our first level 5 lockdown on the 23rd of March 2020. 1 year later, COVID-19 rages on. In the midst of our third wave, we've been faced with political uncertainty, unrest, looting, and threats to our safety. There has never been more an opportune time to escape into our own minds for sanctuary. I do hope after this webinar, we will feel enlightened and mindful. I had to do my own mindfulness this morning before I could address all of you academics. So I'm hoping I can practice some of what I had many hours researching over the last couple of days. As much as mindfulness is something I incorporate into my practice, because it's such an abstract concept, it's a challenge to try and translate it, and especially for people who have not been practicing it. Have you managed to get my slides on for me, Mariam? I'm sorry, we are having technical challenges.
Yep. Okay, are they visible?
We're going to go to the top. Yeah, they're visible, but if we can go to the top of the...
You can see Dr. Govender has been doing lots of research.
Lots of research. Okay, so we can go to slide 2. So that's, I would think that we have to ask the question, what is mindfulness? You know, how did mindfulness find its way from Buddhist meditation into Western psychology? Is it different from meditation? And as I said, because it's such an abstract concept that I think everybody has questions around it. Is it a religious practice? Is it meditation the same? Next slide, please. So mindfulness is an awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally. This was written by Jon Kabat-Zinn. He is an American professor and a student of Zen Buddhist teachers. the Buddhist teachers assisted him in incorporating Buddhist teaching with scientific findings. And he is a pioneer in the movement of mindful-based stress reduction. Meditation as an entity refers to a family of self-regulation practices to train attention and awareness, to bring mental processes under greater voluntary control to achieve a mentally clear and emotionally calm and stable state. Wells and Shapiro are two psychologists that have done extensive work into mindfulness and meditation. So to try and make an effort to differentiate between the mindfulness and meditation, what are the fundamental differences? So mindfulness appears to be more an awareness of something. So an awareness of your breath, an awareness of tension in your muscles, an awareness of your bodily functions, whereas a meditation aims to be an awareness of nothing, where the practice is more directed at trying to focus attention and concentration. Whereas mindfulness is more a quality, it's trying to relate yourself to the environment. It's not a formal type of practice that is practiced to alter your state of mind. So for example, in meditation, one can use, a transcendental type of meditation where you use a monosyllabic word. We'll go through the different types of meditation on the next slide. But just effectively to tell you that mindfulness is a way of life, as opposed to meditation, which is a practice that can result actually in mindfulness. So the different types of meditation, there's, transcendental meditation. It has Vedic origins, and it's using a monosyllabic sound, and the
Dr. Kavenda? Dr.
somebody
Kavenda?
muted me. Sorry, I realized you muted me.
Yes,
It's okay.
someone muted you.
Yeah, it's
So,
fine.
yes,
No problem. I'll start with the slide again. So meditation, there are different types, right? There's transcendental type of meditation. This has been made popular by some of the Hollywood stars. It's from Vedic origins, and it's like using a monosyllabic sound, but the mind is allowed to roam freely. So for example, you'll find that some people practice it by using the sound Om. The Zen meditation, the Zen Buddhists, they have very strict discipline and attention control. So their focus is to redirect attention and trying to create concentration. Mantra meditation can be any kind of comforting or uplifting phrase or prayer that is repetitive. And mindfulness meditation is the refocusing of thoughts as the mind wanders. So what does that mean? So concentration is like a blunt instrument, it's trying to cultivate mindfulness, but it's not mindfulness itself. It's a focusing of the mind like a laser beam. So you're forcing your mind all the time to focus and to have attention and concentration. In contrast, mindfulness cannot be forced. It's a more gentle quality that results from repetitive processes of gently reclaiming the wandering mind. So when we do the exercise at the end, you will understand a little bit more as to what I mean by this. So just again, to reiterate, the meditation is more a directed process. The mindfulness is being present within yourself and trying to gently refocus your thoughts recurrently, but without forcing it, and accepting it when your mind actually does wander. Because the key to it is that we do not want to be judgmental of our mind wandering. We don't want to be judgmental of our ruminations. And particularly with patients with depression, they often have negative thoughts. So we gently try to refocus the mind into being present and here and now. They call it the monkey mind because it is difficult to pin it down. We often find that our thoughts are wandering all the time, and therefore it's called the monkey mind. So in reference to what the take-home message is, let's not make heavy weather about what's the difference between mindfulness and meditation. Mindfulness meditation just makes it more accessible to the Western world. It just allows you to demystify meditation because people are often intimidated by meditation. One wants to look at meditation as that it has to be taught, you have to be focused, that there's incredible amount of discipline. You can be eclectic and you can choose what works for you. And despite all the differences in terms of meditation, there are benefits from all types of meditative practices. The difference is the mindfulness is it's a kinder, non-judgmental approach. And it's allowing the meditator to look at their failings, their mistakes with kindness. So this guy, Han, he is, I actually watched him on Oprah last night, an interview that he had. He is a Vietnamese Buddhist and again, a pioneer in his field. He formed the passive movement in reference to the war in Vietnam. So he describes mindfulness is the miracle by which we master and restore ourselves. So he says, consider yourself, example, as a magician who cuts his body into many parts, places each part in a different region, hands in the south, arms in the east, legs in the north, and then by some miraculous power, lets forth a cry which reassembles the whole, every part of his body. Mindfulness is like that. It's the miracle which we can call back in a flash, our dispersed mind, and restore it to wholeness so that we can live each minute of life. Can we get the next slide, please? So as scientists and clinicians, researchers, we all look at evidence-based medicine. Is there any science behind the practice that has ancient roots? So this is a marrying of science with the mind. You can go to the next slide, please. So the brain is an incredibly complex organ. And we all want to practice a kind of therapy or treatment that has some evidence behind it. And as we know, the gold standard for evidence-based medicine is randomized controlled trials. So if you look at how the studies have increased from 1955 to 1997, where there was one study, and in 2013 to 2015, there have been 216 studies. And one needs to give consideration to the fact that these studies are actually not being sponsored by pharmaceutical companies. So and once a patient, an individual, is actually taught how to practice mindfulness, there's no further reimbursement. So there had to be some merit for people to continue looking for evidence as to why it works as efficiently. Next slide. So this is a very interesting slide because the cortex, the brain itself, is important for all your higher functioning, especially the frontal lobe. So your frontal lobe tells you, it's your inhibitory lobe. Don't stab somebody, don't strip naked in public. But at the same time, it's coordinating your emotions, it's coordinating your thoughts. So if I have to give you an example, say you were bitten by a dog as a child. And in that example, when you see a dog, you're going to get a visual stimulus, which will go to your occipital lobe, which is your visual cortex. Your brain then will quickly reference in, can you stay on the last slide, please, Mariam? Your brain will quickly reference effectively what is the memory related to this dog. And then you will have a deep-seated memory that you were bitten. Then that would increase in your subcortical structures like that amygdala that we were talking about. It will surface anxiety, and that will send a signal then to your frontal lobe for an action. So the frontal lobe will then decide, this is a little puppy, it's not a threat, I don't need to run or fight. Or it's going to say, there's an incredible threat, and I need to actually either run or fight. So this amygdala, and it allows for communication to the frontal lobe of the brain and the cortex of the brain. And therefore, it's a little almond-shaped section of neurological tissue. It's located in the temporal lobe. The temporal lobe is an important lobe. It's the same area where your memory is situated, and it coordinates responses in your environment, and it triggers an emotional response such as danger. And as I explained, the fight or flight response when you see a dog. This is a slide that actually of functional MRIs. So this is a Harvard scholar, Desbordes. She actually looked at functional MRIs on patients after they had been trained in mindfulness. And you will see that there was reduced activation of the amygdala after watching emotional content in students or in meditators or people who have been trained in mindfulness. So there was clear evidence on the functional MRI that there was reduced activation of the amygdala. If there's reduced activation of the amygdala, we are then going to have reduced thoughts and feedback into the frontal lobe, and then your brain starts becoming decluttered. Next slide, please. So she also documented on functional MRI that people who have learned mindfulness, are scholars of mindfulness, actually showed consistent and reduced activation of the patterns of the amygdala, even when they were not confronted with any kind of threat, but they were working and doing everyday activities. So it already shows that the amygdala has learned to switch off or to cool down, as we call it, when you have learned the practice of mindfulness, because there is less information that's being processed into the cortex and to the frontal lobe. Next slide, please. So further to the research, Professor Rakesh Jain and his wife, Suandra Jain, I had the pleasure of meeting them in a 2014 Congress that we had here in Durban. It was our SASOP Congress, so the South African Association of Psychiatrists. And I was quite impressed with him, a very charismatic man. And he developed this program called Wild 5, which is the wellness intervention for life, a lifestyle. Can you go back to the last slide, please, Mariam? Rakesh and Suandra have had a very vested interest in looking at mindfulness. And again, as he pointed out at that point as well, this is not pharmaceutical that is invested in the research. They found that the mindfulness had such significant, scientific validity. They also did functional MRIs on their patients. They are in Houston, Texas, and their research is really, really astounding, and I would highly recommend that you look them up. Next slide, please. So this is some of the research that they've done. They've looked at what one would consider a marriage made in heaven, cognitive behavioral therapy, and mindfulness, it's because patients, particularly when they actually have depression, can ruminate. One looks at actually trying to reduce the ruminations, and that's where the mindfulness part comes in. And the cognitive behavioral therapy is one of the few therapies that is evidence-based with randomized control trials as well, and has been effective in showing that a patient can actually reduce their depressive symptoms by just practicing cognitive behavioral therapy. So how does it work? So if I have to give you an example, right? The example is that, say you were walking, I think it might be on the next slide, Mariam, will you have a look at it for me, please? Yes, so if you were walking down the road and call your friend Pat was walking up the road, you call out and you greet Pat. Pat ignores you. The feeling that you would have would be one of hurt and rejection. The thought in your head would be, what did I do to Pat? Why is she ignoring me? And then the emotion will produce a thought, and then eventually it'll result in a behavior. That behavior might be, I don't actually want to see Pat. You know, she's being so mean to me. I don't want to see her. But if I later said to you, you know, Pat's mother was involved in a car accident, she didn't hear you over the traffic, and as a result, that emotion will change from feeling hurt and rejected to feeling a little bit guilty. You thought badly of Pat. The thought in your head would then be, what can I actually do to make it up to Pat? And then your behavior changes from not wanting to be with Pat to actually going to visit Pat and maybe taking her a bunch of flowers. Now, why is this significant? Because one, we often have the most negative automatic thoughts. We think the most negative things when we have a scenario where we feel hurt. So the key here is to be in the moment, to be aware of your feelings, and then to slow down the processes and to say, what are the possibilities? And that's where the cognitive behavioral therapy comes in. So the mindfulness is about being present and being aware. And then the cognitive behavioral therapy is about changing your thought patterns so it affects your emotions, and therefore it presents differently in your behavior. Next slide, please, Mariam. So the scans, again, what is it showing? The scans show that when you practice mindful-based cognitive behavioral therapy, that you have a reduction in the amygdala size. So literally, there is not recruitment of that amygdala. And so the size of the gland itself or the neurological tissue reduces. And there's reduced activity in that amygdala. Next slide, please. So when we talk about dispositional mindfulness, there are some people who have a greater ability and affinity to actually practice mindfulness and being present and in the moment. And they have shown that these individuals do have smaller amygdalas as opposed to people who are highly stressed and highly strung individuals. Therefore, people who are practicing or learn to practice mindfulness can also reduce the size of that amygdala. Next slide. Volumetric changes in the hippocampus. The hippocampus situated in the temporal lobe of the brain. During depression, they have shown that if you have untreated depression over an extended period of time, you can have a reduction in the hippocampal volume. And that's why you find patients, especially patients with depression, often complain of memory impairment. We call it pseudo-dementia, which means it's a false type of dementia. So the patients who have this kind of pseudo-dementia often have short-term memory problems. I can't remember where I left my keys. I don't remember what somebody said to me. Whereas with the patients with true dementia, they generally are not even aware of the fact that they have memory impairment, right? So MBCT, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, has been shown to reduce your cognitive reactivity. So they've done these measurements on what is our gold standard for rating scales when we do research. So here they did the Hamilton rating scale, and they showed consistently with MBCT that there has been a reduction in the scores for depression, and that patients had greater remission rates. There is research, previous research, that has shown that if you have an antidepressant along with cognitive behavioral therapy, the effect of symptom remission is higher than if you had one or the other. So a combination of medication with MBCT will give you more remission rates. Next slide, please. This is the other important part of MBCT, because it's not just affecting your brain, your hippocampal volume, your amygdala. It also affects your heart rate, your blood pressure. Patients who are able to be mindful have better cardiovascular health. So if we think about it again, we often talk and we say, oh, that man was so stressed, he had a heart attack. What is the mechanism of the heart attack? Effectively, what it means is that if you are able to slow down your fight or flight response, you are able to slow down the neurohormonal impact of cortisol, which is your stress hormone, and therefore your cardiovascular health improves. Next slide, please. They also showed from MBCT that there is less inflammation. So your immune response is better. You do not have immune suppression. And again, it's the same thing. I was so stressed that I actually got sick. And how did you get sick? It's because the inflammatory markers and so forth are high. Your cortisol, your stress hormone is high. And as a result, you will find that you are more likely to be immunocompromised. So mindfulness and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy has the ability to reduce inflammation. Next slide. So MBCT does not just work for depression, it also works for other conditions, other disorders, like generalized anxiety disorder. Generalized anxiety disorder is described when a person has persistent worry about everyday things. They can have irritable bowel syndrome as a result. You can have lightheaded, dizziness, preoccupation. Is there, enough toilet paper in the house? What's going to happen tomorrow? Is my child going to do well at school? It's persistent worry that is there recurrently. And if you look at the scores, and you'll see that mindfulness-based cognitive therapy has been able to reduce the scores for generalized anxiety and push generalized anxiety into remission. Next slide. It's the same with panic disorder. The difference with the panic disorder as opposed to generalized anxiety, patients with panic disorder have recurrent panic attacks. The brain and body are in a hyper-alert situation, often overreacting to a stimulus in the environment. And recurrent panic attacks, again, can actually result in cardiovascular disease, result in shrinking of the hippocampus of the brain, can result in gastric ulcers. I was so stressed, I got an ulcer, irritable bowel syndrome. So especially for people who are having recurrent panic attacks, they often have anticipatory anxiety. Am I going to have another attack? What if I can't escape? And as a result, they are in hyper alert all the time. So mindfulness-based cognitive therapy can reduce depressive symptoms, and it can reduce recurrent episodes of depression. And as I've mentioned to you previously, that in combination with an antidepressant, there is greater efficacy and effectiveness in reducing the remission rates. Are we back?
We're back, thank you.
Okay, all right. So in this slide, what I aim to demonstrate here is the fight or flight response. So if you're exposed to a lion in a jungle, your first responder is going to be adrenaline. So you will have an elevated heart rate, blood pressure, glucose, because your body has to push out glucose into your muscles so that you can run or fight. So your heart rate, your blood pressure will be much higher than average. You'll find that you can activate your tummy. You know, people say, I got so scared, I felt like vomiting, I had diarrhea, I felt like wetting myself, because you can't run or fight on a full stomach. You will evacuate your bowel. You can hyperventilate. You know, people say, I felt so scared, I couldn't breathe. You can become sweaty. Sweat makes you offensive to your opponent. If you think about how a dog shows aggression, biting on their jowls, biting on their teeth, you can find that you can get tension in your neck and your shoulders. Hi, is the sound on?
Yeah, it's our sound. Dr. Govinda, if we can wrap up, you have a few minutes left. I'm sure everyone's excited about the session, the actual mindfulness session with you. Thank you.
Okay. So the fight or flight response is actually what happens is first the adrenaline and then cortisol, and then as a result, via neurohormonal pathway, you end up with metabolic diseases. Okay, next slide, please, Mariam. So I put this slide in because as women, this was our traditional roles for where women were the lady of the house, caregiver to the children, and you know there was extended family support. And then with social evolution, this is the result of social evolution. With dual income homes, there's reduced dependence for women, but there's increased chaos in our minds because we are juggling many things at the same time. This image for me was quite telling because this is the subliminal images that we're getting all the time. She's best at being both, trying to be perfect, you know. Moms are not wrong or lazy because they get home 15 minutes ahead of schedule. Next slide. But the reality of the situation is this. We've got resentful children, reduced frustration tolerance, and women are juggling all the time. These are the images that we have been bombarded with over the last 18 months. And next slide, Mariam. We've got political issues, we've got lockdown, we've got unrest, we've got so many images. Where do you escape to? Because the whole world is in a pandemic. So we need to be mindful about what we are doing, or we can be mindful, right? So I'm going to give you an example of what I mean by squeaky shoes. If you can just go back to the previous slide, please, Mariam. So I was exposed to a scholar who was teaching mindfulness, and very charismatic man. And just to give you an example of what it means to be mindful or mindful, he was in a shopping mall, as he put it, and he approached a woman, as he calls it, beautiful by international standards. He approached her and said hello, and she said to him, "Your shoes squeak." And as he started walking afterward, all he could hear was squeak, squeak, squeak. So the moral of the story was, 5 minutes prior to her meeting prior to him meeting her, he wasn't aware of his shoes squeaking. And in the same way, all of the images that we were flooded with previously are now filling our minds, and we need to be able to escape from it. Next slide. So the WHO speaks of the definition of health. So you don't need to be ill to be mindful, because it's a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not just the absence of disease. So in the next slide, it talks about wellness deficit. So it's not just that you have an illness or a disease, but you can have a wellness deficit where you don't feel well, even though you don't have and have not been diagnosed with the disease process. Next slide. And again, this is work from Rakesh Jain, and they talk about nothing that is actually new to us. They speak about exercise, mindfulness, sleep, social connectedness, and nutrition. So in the next slide, you will see that they talk about the exercise for at least 30 minutes a day, at least moderate intensity, mindfulness for 10 minutes of the day, practicing good sleep hygiene, and good social connectedness. Now, the social connectedness has been particularly challenging, obviously, with COVID-19, and has contributed to our isolation, particularly lockdown blues. But one needs to be mindful of trying to just keep communication on a virtual platform. And nutrition, again, lockdown contributed significantly to weight gain, because people were baking and cooking and found a preoccupation and try to quell the anxiety with food. Next slide. So again, this slide just demonstrates increase in hippocampal volume with exercise, and that's because of all the opioids and the endorphins that are released during exercise. Next slide. Same issue in terms of caudate nucleus. The caudate nucleus effectively, there's less recruitment, there's increased thalamic activity during sleep, and also the volume of the caudate nucleus reduces with exercise. Next slide. So there it is, the quiet place inside you. You can go there just by breathing. You can take some long, slow breaths. It's a good place to go if you're feeling angry or sad, a good place to talk about your feelings. When you go to your quiet place inside you, you will find that your feelings are not that big, and you can go there whenever you want and stay however long you want. Next slide. Next slide, Maria. So you'll find that when you're being mindful, you're going to pretty much have this kind of scenario in your head, because your thoughts are going to be all over the place. Am I in the moment? Is this the moment? How will I know if I'm in the moment? I'm hungry. I want chips. So it's about the practice. So you really have to practice hard to become mindful. Next slide, please. Apologies for the slides being sideways. We had difficulty getting them on from my side. Okay, let me start. How do you start? So to start being mindful, you need to start with a daily routine. Mindfulness is a way of perceiving, thinking, and behaving. It requires commitment, and there are mindfulness exercises that you can practice on a regular basis, right? My advice to you, especially if you're starting mindfulness, to use some of the smartphone apps as a guide. I found them to be really efficient, and that's pretty much how I actually started my mindfulness. So the kind of exercises that we look at, you are not able to get on the other slide, Maria? Can you hear me? Other slide, Maria? Okay, the exercises that we're talking about, there's exercises such as the body scan. During the body scan exercise, you try to focus inwardly on your body, the way that it feels. The task is to develop an awareness of the sensations in your body. So you can breathe deeply, you can remain aware of your body, of the sensations in your body, the tension in your neck, what's happening with your tummy. You can do exercises such as 3-minute breathing. And during these exercises, you guide it through breathing techniques, paying attention to your breath. We'll do an exercise as such in after the talk. You can do mindfulness stretching. This is an exercise where you are mindful about your stretching. There are lots of videos about it that you can actually have a look, and they're freely available on the internet. You can do mindful breathing while focusing on your breath. So you sit somewhere quiet, and this is an exercise where we're going to go through again on one of the apps that I will play for you. And you can do mindful meditation. It's a type of meditation where you learn to practice mindfulness. You will be seated for 10 to 30 minutes and you focus on your breathing. It's very similar to the other exercises, except your body is not moving and the time is longer. You can also choose to act mindfully. So choose an activity during the day that you will perform in a mindful way, that is with complete awareness. The best type of activities would be things that you do automatically: driving, showering, cooking. So if you example, sitting in your office, while you're sitting on your chair, be mindful about your posture on the chair, how you're sitting in your chair. What does your sit bones feel like on the chair? What's the tension in your back? What's your posture? Are your shoulders stooped forward? You can do things like mindful eating. So for example, if it's your lunch break, don't rush through lunch. Sit at your desk, take your time to enjoy your lunch. Focus on the texture of your meal, the effort that went into making it, and the flavors of the food in your mouth. I have to tell you that last night my husband made supper like he usually does. He makes supper almost every night. And I was thinking about this talk when I was sitting there. And I all of a sudden realized, after sitting there and my mind was ruminating and I was eating mindlessly, and then realized that he took all of this effort to prepare this, and I need to be mindful about what I was eating. So I focused on the texture, and I focused on the fragrance of the meal. I focused on the texture of the mushroom in my mouth, and it actually made the meal so much more pleasurable because I took that opportunity to focus. I've often been that person. I'm rushing between patients and I'm gobbling down my lunch. It's an exercise that one has to be conscious of and be mindful of. It's not something that you have to do to get through your day, but rather be mindful about what you're doing. There is an exercise, and if you look it up, because of time constraints, I'm just going to mention it to you. It's called a mindful moment with a raisin. And I highly recommend that you take it. If we did not do this on a virtual platform, I would have had each one of you with a raisin in your hand, and we would have explored this mindful moment with a raisin. So there are other ways to combine things like mindfulness and gratitude. They're very two good tools that work together, because mindfulness encourages you to be present and to be grateful for the things that are in your life. So if I have to give you an example, so say if you have a negative experience, like I'm terrified about the job interview, I am so nervous, you can have an active gratitude to that and say, I am grateful to present my skills to the people I admire. Another example, I am worried that I might not finish my work by the deadline. I am grateful to show what I can produce when I have worked so hard. So gratitude and mindfulness, which is why I said to you right at the beginning, mindfulness is a way of life. So the apps that I posted, they are actually on my slides. Maybe Mariam can actually share them when she has an opportunity. So the ones that I use the mindfulness app. There's Headspace. I use Simply Being a fair amount, particularly during my pregnancy. And I must say that it worked really well for me. And to date, my daughter is 5 years old. And when she has difficulty sleeping because she's been overstimulated, she says to me, Mama, can you play some music, please? And what she's referring to is that Simply Being app. So to finally end off, mindfulness is about being fully awake in our lives. It's about perceiving the exquisite vividness of each moment. We can also gain immediate access to our own powerful inner resources for insight, transformation, and healing. So if we have 5 minutes now, I want to go through an exercise with you where I'm going to play a mindfulness video for you. You're not going to start, you won't be able to see the visual, but you're going to actually hear it.
Begin by finding a comfortable seated position, one that reflects a sense of wakefulness and presence. Noticing a sense of the body sitting here. Becoming aware of any sensations arising in the body without trying to change anything. Just noticing, observing what's here. And now getting familiar with the activity of the mind in this present moment. Where is the mind? And what is it up to? Is it in the past? The future? What thoughts and feelings are passing through the mind right now? Just being open to whatever arises. Now directing your attention to the fact that you are breathing. Gathering the attention on the part of the body where you experience the breath most vividly. Noticing each inhalation and each exhalation. When you notice that your attention has wandered off into thoughts, fantasies, plans, memories, worries, just notice where it is gone. And then gently, but deliberately, bring the attention back to focus on the breath once again. Trying to be aware of the sensations of this breath in this moment and this moment and this moment. Expanding your awareness around your breath to a sense of the body as a whole sitting here. Noticing all sensations that arise in the body at this moment. Imagine the whole body breathing, just expanding and releasing. If a sensation arises somewhere in the body that is particularly intense, see if it is possible to be open to what you are feeling. Breathing into this place and letting the exhalation create a kind of softness around this area. Then, returning your attention back to the body as a whole once again. Perhaps experiencing this as a sense of spaciousness and openness. And bringing this feeling with you as you go about the activities of the rest of your day. Remembering that the breath is always available as an inner anchor and a safe harbor, no matter where you are. By returning to the breath, you can invite some more spaciousness around experiences, creating a pause and broadening your perspective, and perhaps seeing things in a new light.
So that was the 5 minutes of mindfulness that I wanted to share with you, and also to illustrate that it pretty much just takes 5 minutes for you in your office, in your car, wherever you are, just to actually be mindful, and you can immediately reduce your tension, your stress. And it's the reason I've recommended the apps from your smartphone, because it's accessible and it assists, especially people who are novices, to actually guide you through the process in itself. It's also very Pavlovian in nature. So it's like behavioral therapy. You know, Pavlov had a dog, he rang a bell and then he would feed the dog, and then the dog salivated every time it heard the bell. So when I hear this bell, I already start feeling an association of calmness. And it's the ability to be able to train your mind to feel calm, just even with the initiation of that bell. So that's the end of my talk. So I'm happy to take questions. Sorry about the slides again. I really apologize. I don't know why I couldn't get them on properly.
Thank you, Dr. Govender. It's been an absolute pleasure. There's quite a few questions in the Q&A. The names of the apps, we will upload them underneath the YouTube recording. There will be an article in the UKZN Ndaba and mainstream media about the presentation, and the information will be shared. At this point, we're not sharing the presentation. That's Dr. Govender's IP. However, we will be sharing the names. The names of the apps, of course, they will be there. How difficult is it to commit to mindfulness on a daily basis? That's one of the questions here.
So it really is like anything in life. If you actually want the benefit from it, it requires commitment, and it really isn't a major commitment. You can do it 5 minutes after you get into bed. You could do it while you are driving. Obviously, be cautious while you're driving, but you'll get used to you listen to music in the background. So some of these apps actually have in the background sounds of nature, or even there's some calming music, and you can switch the audio off so you don't have to hear the voice and you hear the calming music. Remember, you want to be training your brain that when you actually hear it, when you become aware of it, that it becomes reflexive, that you actually just immediately start relaxation. So it's really not difficult to commit to at all. And there is mindfulness for the classroom for kids, and we can train kids. I think that we definitely can commit ourselves to training ourselves.
Dr. Govender, thank you. The next question, do you recommend any mindfulness training programs that somebody can do?
So I'm not sure of where. I know there are a couple of people around KZN that are trained in mindfulness. And I think it depends on what your purpose is for it. If you are actually wanting to use it with your clients, then perhaps it will be beneficial for you to actually get some formal training. If it is for your personal use, I think that starting just with these apps to get accustomed to it, to reduce your own stress levels, and particularly with all the images that I showed you, I think it's important for us to all be able to escape into our quiet place. So yes, there are people who are training. I think you're just going to have to look up who are the trainers. I know there was a lady in Hillcrest that was doing some training, but if it's for your personal use, my advice, start with the apps.
Okay, I think I'm going to hand over to my colleagues now to carry on with the rest of the program.
Greetings, colleagues. I think we have come to the end of the webinar for today. Firstly, I would like to express my gratitude for the privilege to acknowledge and thank all the esteemed attendees for making this webinar a success. Thank you, Corporate Relations and IMBOKODO team under Mrs. Ramabo-Dubusi for organizing this webinar. Thank you very much, Prof. Downs, for the warm welcome. And thank you, Prof. Siddharth Khan, Mariam, for the introduction of our distinguished keynote speaker. We have been honored indeed to receive a sterling keynote address from Dr. Govender, a specialist psychiatrist and psychologist in one of the areas that have been marginalized for decades, the one area of mental health. Not only was the holistic approach presented, but also became a wake-up call to all of us who attended this webinar. We are humbled and grateful to have been afforded this chance to reflect on encouraging wellness and exploring collaborative management strategies to the psychiatric and mental well-being of all. My take home is mindfulness is a way of life. Thank you very much.
Colleagues, can I please ask the steering committee to stay online so that we can take a photo with our guest, and thank you for your attendance.